for this presentation of the first annual CSJ, which is the Sisters of St. Joseph of Orange Center for Reconciliation and Justice. I want to thank the awards committee, many of whom are here, the members of our advisory committee who are on the awards committee, for selecting this fine group of awardees for our first annual awards. The committee chose to focus the award on people who tend to work behind the scenes, under the radar, rather than in the spotlight. So today, they are in the spotlight. So, I'm going to introduce Doris Baisley, a playwright in residence with us in the theater department, and she's going to tell you a little bit about the process.
Thank you. What you're going to see today is a process that Judith and I have been working on with our Voices of Justice classes at LMU. And we are really delighted to have the 5 storytellers, actually 6 storytellers, who were selected for the Hidden Heroes Awards, because it meant that our group of writers and actors and writer-actors got to go and interview them and listen to their stories, and then take the stories home and transform them into a theatrical narrative, monologues, scenes, different kinds of theater pieces that you're going to see today. And it's a wonderful process. It starts with the storyteller, it comes around through the writer, then goes through the actor, then comes back to the storyteller. But the great part is that it comes back to the storyteller with everybody here listening to it. So thank you very much for being part of the process, and we hope you enjoy it.
Daniela Corona, LMU Junior and President of Espere.
In February of 2012, Daniela Corona, on the right, and Shannon O'Brien, on the left, applied for memberships in several existing LMU service organizations.
But they were not accepted to any of them.
Yet the closing of these doors led them to find another door, a new door.
For me, service is a way of seeing God. So when I didn't get into any of the service orgs, I knew I didn't just want to volunteer here and there. And after I talked to Tom King, I decided that I should start another service org, a new service org. That's when Shannon and I teamed up to form Espere. Espere. It means to hope, to hope. We named our service org in honor of the Sisters of St. Joseph. When the Sisters congregation was founded in 17th century France, its focus was on women who were poor, sick, and in need. This is Espere's mission. We, the women of Espere, hereby make it our mission to cultivate the growth of the individual for the growth of the community. In so doing, we strive to preserve the freedoms of those who have passed, to dedicate them to those who come, through justice and conservation to the world and people around us.
Our endeavors aim to protect those who were once enslaved through enduring emotional connections, and to prevent future generations from slavery through acting as spokeswomen for the cause. In addition, we aspire to promote knowledge of sustainable practices in our local communities as we further develop and maintain these traditions throughout our lives.
We're focusing on issues involving women who are abused, from prevention to advocacy, human trafficking, and environmental sustainability. Espere has established service sites at Venice's High School's Learning Garden, a community garden, the Downtown Women's Center, and Tree People, which promotes the planting of trees to improve the LA environment. And we're also getting involved with CAS, the Coalition to Abolish Slavery and Trafficking. We currently have 26 members. I know, we have big plans, but like I said, for me, service is a way of seeing God. But in the past, I've realized that what inspires me the most is the smallest acts of kindness, especially those done by people who have less than you, less than me. For example, there are these 2 young boys, Daniel and Israel, and they help their parents sell fruit from an old beat-up truck. Around 6 a.m., the boys and their family buy the fruit on the outskirts of Tijuana. Then they come to the corner of my house in the middle of upper and middle class homes, but they don't care because the life that they've got, they're thankful for. And it's crazy because my rich friend lives like 10 feet away from them, and they don't care. And most every day when I pass Daniel and Israel, they offer me fruit and water. This small act of kindness has the deepest impact on me. And it's really these kinds of acts that keep me going. It's funny, I originally applied to LMU as a recording arts major. But then I took this trip before college and started, and everything changed. I changed. So when I returned to San Diego, my dream was to live in the jungle and start an orphanage. But my mom was like, oh no, Daniela, we're not paying all this money for college for you to do that. You should take advantage of that gift to do something even bigger with it. Okay, fine. So at the end of my first year, I switched majors from recording arts to political science. My goal is to do something really positive and helpful with what I learned, and I eventually want to start my own nonprofit. I believe forming Espere will help me move closer to my goal. But my dream of living in the jungle and starting an orphanage, well, I have it because I actually went to an orphanage in the jungle, in Honduras, right before I came to LMU. But I think in order to tell you that story of me being changed, I have to tell you the events that led up to that moment. During my junior year in high school, I went to high school in San Diego, and I have friends and family both in San Diego and Tijuana. 2 of my friends died. In September, my best friend died suddenly. No one knows for sure what it is, maybe the flu, and we are shocked. And then in January, another close friend dies. He's my boyfriend's best friend, and he's murdered by we don't know who. This is in Tijuana. Shot 60 times. This happens on my boyfriend's birthday. My boyfriend and I had just seen him an hour before. My boyfriend, he's torn up by this, but he starts to follow a dark path with drugs and anger. But I want to follow the light, you know? At this point in my life, I had not done any real type of service. But ever since I was little, I would see these things and I'd want to do something about it, but I would say, oh, no, later. And then these deaths just made me think, what am I doing every day with my life? I was getting good grades and playing soccer and going with the flow, but I didn't stop and think about anything. I was beginning to wake up, I guess. When I start my senior year, I don't break up with him, but I can feel something in me starting to change. I take a social justice class with my teacher, Darlene Di Tomaso, and she tells us, like on the first day,
I'm planning a student trip to Honduras for July. We'll be helping out in an orphanage for 2 weeks. It will be challenging and exciting, and will make a real difference in the lives of these children. Who would like to join me?
So in September, July feels so far away, but it got here pretty quick. And in the meantime, I apply to LMU as a recording arts major and get accepted. And before I go on the trip, I break up with my boyfriend. I am ready for Honduras. On the trip, it's my teacher, Darlene, 14 classmates, 2 moms, and me. Now, I go to Tijuana a lot. But Honduras is the second poorest country in Latin America, and I honestly cannot believe the poverty that I see there. The airport is like the nicest building, and it is not even that nice. So we get on a bus, and we head to the orphanage in the jungle, and we see cardboard houses after cardboard houses on the side of the road, and everything seems like almost nothing. But at the same time, it's the jungle, and it's so green and amazing. It's just this weird balance of poverty and beauty, and everyone is just so happy. And most of us on the trip are American, and we're just like shocked at how happy the poor people are. So we get to the orphanage, and this rich guy from Luxembourg who runs it, Esteban, he greets us, and I'm like really struck because he's this really cute guy who looks like Adam Levine, you know, the guy from Maroon 5, and I'm like, what is this guy doing in the middle of the jungle? Anyway, he and like 2 kids take our luggage and they show us to our bunk beds, and they were just so happy to have us. So, one of the first things that I see are little kids with machetes. They use machetes to cut grass everywhere and to cut their food for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Well, they use machetes for everything, and I think it's so cool. But this is where I make my best little friend, Freddie. This cute 7-year-old kid with a machete. His parents died when he was a baby, but he is the sweetest kid, and he's so wise. He's also a bit of a troublemaker. Okay, real quick, there are these other kids here too, as part of a Catholic missionary group, and really, they won't want to do anything except sing Kumbaya in the common area. I'm sorry, it's the truth. And they expect us to do the same thing, and I do not want to sing. I mean, I want to be with the kids, and I want to help. You know, that's what we came here for. So finally, my teacher, Darlene, goes up to them, and she says, in a very nice way,
I'm sorry, but we didn't come here to just sing worship songs, which is something that we can do back home. So we'll sing just one more worship song, and then we're going to do some work. You can join us if you'd like.
after that, they didn't want anything to do with us. But except for this one girl, but I'll tell you about her in a bit. So, over the next 2 weeks, we help the kids paint their big jungle gym and help them with their chores. We go to Mass with them, and we're there for their baptisms and their communions. Actually, a lot of them are just getting baptized because most of them are abandoned kids, because their parents know that their kids will get an education at the orphanage. And some of them are street kids, and some of them, like Freddie, they've lost their parents when they were babies, and, well, he's lived here since he was 2 weeks old. At night, we make food at a different house within the orphanage, and there are a lot of different houses. Like, for example, there's one house for the special needs girls, there's one house for the special needs boys, and then they're separated by ages. And oh, yes, we play soccer with the kids. I play a lot of soccer over these next 2 weeks, and the only thing we don't do is cut the grass with the machetes because we don't know how to use them. But one of the kids gave me a machete, and as a going away gift, and I wanted to bring it on the plane, but it didn't fit in my suitcase. So the kids, they planted it in the middle of the tree so that they would always remember me. So back to the Catholic missionary girl real quick. You could tell that she totally wanted to be with us. And on a Sunday, she finally comes to the river with us and the kids. Sure, the river is a bit muddy and it seems, I don't know, a little strange to go into the muddy river with the kids, but she ends up loving it. We all do. It was the best 2 weeks of my life. I know those 2 weeks changed me. And at the end, I actually didn't want to leave Honduras. I didn't want to come back to the States, and I just wanted to stay there with the kids. I mean, their life is so hard, but they are happy. And when I start to think of our comfortable lives back home, I was like, how can anyone complain? Because people are always going to complain no matter how much they actually have. I guess I just didn't want to deal with the transition from Honduras to San Diego and Los Angeles, you know? But obviously, I had to come back home. My friends, they threw me a welcome back party, which was nice with balloons and a lot of food and stuff. But then they named my computer, and they said it missed me. And I was like, I wouldn't name my computer. And I was like, I don't know. It was just a really weird transition. I actually slept in my garage for a week because I wanted to sleep on the ground, and my room is pink, and I hate pink. And, well, that's a long story. I just didn't want to go out and be with people, you know? I guess I just wasn't ready. But I come to LMU in the fall, and I changed my major from recording arts to political science, and I am ready to do service, real service. And as you know, I don't get into any of the other service orgs, and Tom King tells Shannon and me to start our own service org. And now here we are with Esperé. And no doubt my experience in Honduras directly impacted Esperé's mission to help with human trafficking. There is a huge amount of unseen trafficking that exists all over the world. And it's connected to almost every social justice issue that you can imagine. Homelessness, environmental problems. For example, a natural disaster can leave a child parentless, and they become easy targets of the traffickers. Racism, poverty, and immigration, especially illegal immigrants who are afraid to report anything for fear of being deported. You know, I'm always thinking about Freddie and the other kids from the orphanage. I still talk to them, actually. They call me from telephones. Yeah, so they're allowed to use the phone once a week. And so when I see like this huge number on my cell, I know it's them. And they fill me in on what's happening with school and their lives, and it's just great. They called me on my birthday too. Yeah. I miss them. So, yeah, these kids changed my life. And I'm gonna visit the orphanage again. It's my #1 goal for next summer, and I can't wait.
Elmo Johnson, LMU Events Specialist, Events and Classroom Management.
Everywhere we go.
Everywhere we go.
You're supposed to respond. Bring it on. Repeat after me. Everywhere we go.
Everywhere we go,
We wanna know
we want to know
who we are.
who we are.
So we tell them.
So we tell them
Crazy Eights.
crazy eggs.
My passion in life is running. I run marathons. I love it. I was bitten back in 1989. I think was when I ran my first marathon. I've ran 30 marathons, not counting any of the half marathons that I completed. I started teaching other people how to run marathons. What I try to do is to make running fun. Yeah. I try to make you forget that you're running. I mean, when you're out there running 18, 20 miles, you start wanting to stop. But I'm out there 10, and they didn't do this. My co-pace leaders didn't do what I do. I would have a conversation with people. How's it going? How was your weekend? How was your weekend? Blah, blah, blah. You know, because I'm feeling the crowd. I'm feeling my group. I mean, I'm looking at you. I'm making sure that you're running properly. That's my job. I do it for free, but that's my job. And I'd start chanting, up in the morning, sun.
Up in the morning, sun.
We're blah, 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 blah. You know, I can't do it right now because I actually have to be in the situation. This is me out there. I branded our groups. Our groups had numbers, 1, 5s, 2s, and I branded us and started calling us the Crazy Eights. And as a result, in having uniqueness in what we were doing, many groups tried to emulate what we were doing. I got recognized from my peers, other group leaders. I started out with the LA Marathon group. They're called the LA Road Runners, but there are other running groups in Los Angeles. One's called LA Leggers. I moved from the Road Runners to Leggers, which is a whole other community in Santa Monica. But we are all one community because the common denominator is that we all train for the LA Marathon. So as a group leader, I got recognized for the unique things I did as a pace leader. The Golden Shoe Award is from the LA Leggers. And it's basically leadership out there in the community. Oh yeah. That's what someone said, because I asked someone on another project out here in LMU, why do you think that they're recognizing me for this award? And they said, well, Elmo, you're always out in the community. You're doing things. You're with the LA Marathon, right? And I said, okay, you work for Nike, right? Oh yeah? So I'm in the community just for fun, and these people are loving me. I was nominated to Nike's LA Best Award a while back. It's basically for people who make a difference in the community by inspiring others to be their best. And my name is thrown in the hat. I'm right there, Elmore Johnson. But it's given to people in the community that help others, but help them in a way that's somewhat unique because what we do, because we get recognized, because we are standouts. There was something unique about us that caused them to nominate us. So I was one of the nominees. I remarried in spring of 2008. My wife's name is Louisa, and she's my angel. She inspires me every day, and I love her so very much. We have what's called a blended family, 3 boys and 1 girl. Our children are very close. My son's name is Andre, and my daughter's name is Nina. My 2 stepsons are Chris and Daniel. My wife and 3 of our 4 children are all LMU alumni. I'm in a place that's very interesting in my life right now. It's very interesting what's happening. For example, it's like totally unexpected. Totally unexpected, but it came at an interesting time because I'm going through something. We just attended a family reunion in Arkansas, which is where my mom is from. My kids never really got to meet my side of the family too much. We never got to experience that because growing up in South Central in the early 80s, that neighborhood wasn't really conducive for us to spend too much time and be known by anyone really. In my family, I'm the only one to graduate high school. Well, I did go to college. However, I grew up in one of the poorest neighborhoods in LA. I felt it was important for me to become employed and make money to support my young family. I got a notification through Facebook that my mother's side of the family was putting together a family reunion. It's in Arkansas. It's in the rural part of Arkansas. I had no expectation of what this was going to be, but I can tell you this, it's rural Arkansas. And it's slower than the city, to put it mildly. So long story short, I thought about it and said, you know what? This is an important time. Because my son, he's newly married, he has 1 child, and they recently announced that they're having twins on the way, so I'll be blessed with 2 more grandchildren, and my daughter is a school teacher, and she's committed to that, and our lives go in different directions, as you know. So our time is pretty well taken up by what's going on in our individual lives. And I thought to myself, once I asked them, will you be available on this date to go to a family reunion? I would love it if you could go, because the thought occurred to me, I should do this. I should make this happen. They've never met any of their cousins. Some of the people I haven't even met. It cost me a great amount of money, but I had it. I worked a side job, and I had a little extra cash stashed away for something. So sure enough, I looked at airlines, I looked at the hotel, I looked at the registration fee and all that, and the stars lined up for me. I was blessed. We had a great time. We just got back a week ago or so. My daughter was just going wild. Sitting on hay bales, looking at Angus cows, all of that. Riding on the 4-wheeler, I have pictures of that. The son loved it. Actually, he was excited about meeting his cousins because he started blowing up Facebook with, my dad is taking us to Arkansas to meet all of you. I never met you before. But they would email him back, who is this? And then they found out, oh, it's Elmo's son, because I'd been there twice before for funerals. But I didn't go back to Arkansas until I was in my 40s. I went for my aunt's funeral, and that was where I was able to meet a handful of my relatives there. So it was a blessing spending this one-on-one time with my 2 children. It was joyous. I can't even put into words what that meant to me in my life at this time.
Working under the radar, repairing justice, and rebuilding broken human relationships.
So, when I heard the sisters were recognizing me for this award, I called my immediate supervisor and I said, I'm excited, but I want to call and say no, not to do this. Because I don't think based on what I'm reading that this is about me. Because it says in the nomination that you're being recognized for reconciliation, and they are looking for people who are working under the radar to repair justice and rebuild human relationships. And I'm looking at that, I highlight that, and I say, I don't get it. And he said to me, Elmo, I'm glad you called me. Because if you had called me and said, oh yeah, I should have gotten this award, then I would have questioned it. But your reaction is exactly the way it was supposed to be. He said, I sit here smiling, knowing that you indeed deserve that award. And I thought, oh my gosh, okay, thank you. And I said, oh, when I get this notification, I was on my way to Spain and Portugal to walk as a pilgrim in the Camino del Santiago de Compostela. There is a professor here, Professor Hubert Medina, a math professor here at LMU. He goes on pilgrimage every year or every other year to Santiago de Compostela, which is the cathedral there. It's a Catholic religious tradition where pilgrims reenact what took place many years ago, where St. James the Apostle, spreading the good word of Jesus, was killed, and the pilgrims covered his body in shells, and they took it upon themselves to carry St. James the Apostle all the way from France and bury him. Every year, subsequently, pilgrims reenact the pilgrimage to Santiago. The Camino de Santiago is a spiritual journey that pilgrims of all faiths and backgrounds have traveled for years. It's a physical challenge. We walked for 175 miles over 11 days all the way to Santiago, Spain. My wife, Luisa, encouraged me to go on the Camino de Santiago pilgrimage. 2 years prior, she walked the Camino, taking the route which begins in France and finishes in Santiago, Spain. When you're out there in a pilgrimage, though you start out with a group, there are periods where you're just alone because you don't walk at the same pace as the next person that's with you. So for 11 days, we were out there. So it gives you an opportunity to reflect on yourself. Now I'll get the chance to reflect and think on how to approach this. I haven't really done anything big. I'm not out feeding the homeless. I'm not out doing big things to bring people together. I don't know where there are examples immediately thinking where I've helped repair broken human relationships. But then when I start to dig, I use the term dig. When I start to reflect on what I've done, it was interesting. I found it quite interesting. And I thought, what? I'm all right.
Greatest victories in your life.
Receiving this award, because it's a humanitarian award of charity. One thing I was going to say is that the way I was looking for big things that caused me to be recognized, I overlooked some of the things that I had done, like mentoring high school students, my midnight mission service, local community service outreach, and just connecting with people through my various LMU assignments. In my office at LMU, there are always students around because I like to talk to them, get to know them, give them my own personal life advice. So, on reflection on how I would be recognized, I found a quote from a mentor who I met here at LMU, Bishop Desmond Tutu. And I met him at Peach Jam, an event I managed here at LMU. It was a big accomplishment here at the university. We had 3,000 students come here to participate for that event, and 6 Nobel laureates, including Bishop Desmond Tutu. And I had never managed an event of that size before. It was huge. It was the most challenging event that I've managed so far in my event career. I walked away from it with a feeling of accomplishment because the feeling that I got back was all positive. The people were happy with the way we handled their event requirements, and when I say we, it wasn't just myself representing the university, but approximately 6 others were a part of the event staff that were represented by the Center for Service in Action. There were 6 or 7 members of that staff that made it happen. At Peach Jam, I met Desmond Tutu, and I was aware of him and his relationship to Nelson Mandela. And I made it known to him how much I appreciated his efforts for helping to end apartheid in South Africa. Desmond Tutu said something that brought it all home for me. Do your little bit of good where you are. That's me. I do my little bit. I don't feel like I do big things. But when I went back and reflected on this, I said, okay, now I feel comfortable accepting this award. Because that's what I do. A lot of little things. Because all those little things you do can have a big impression on the world.
Sisters of St. Joseph of Orange, directional statements.
To a wounded world in need of healing and compassion.
In the midst of our vulnerability and emptiness, in a time of limited and unevenly shared global resources,
We ask for the grace to educate,
To heal,
To liberate.
both ourselves and our dear neighbor,
May our endeavors to relieve, heal, and stand with the poor proclaim us as Sisters of St. Joseph of Orange, the congregation of God's great love.
Dr. Mary McCullough, Associate Dean and Professor, LMU School of Education.
I'm a child of God, and I'm forever grateful for that journey I'm walking. And I'm a mom, and a nana, and a leader, and a teacher. That's who I am. And a woman who grew up during the women's movement, so really proud of what I've learned, and really proud of being able to be a leader, even though sometimes it was tough. That's what I say. If you keep your work focused on the kids, you will never go wrong. How did I get here? I'm the oldest of 4 kids in my family. My dad was a veteran of World War II. He was my main mentor, my biggest teacher in life. His name was Norm, and everybody loved Norm. He lost his leg during the war, so when he came back, they promoted him to a desk job. He worked in human resources for his entire career. He was a very self-made person. I learned a lot from my dad about people. People would seek out my dad for advice. I also learned a lot of responsibility being the oldest of 4 kids. I was often left in charge. In fact, one time, some therapist somewhere along the way said, if he could bottle my sense of responsibility, he could solve the juvenile crime problem in any parts of the So in addition to being this, having this, how can I assist you? How can I help you be your best self? Which is really what I learned from my dad. Anyways, so I went all through Catholic schools. I'm a 3rd-generation native of Los Angeles. Pretty rare. You'd think I own a lot of property, but I don't. So when it came time for college, I ended up at Mount St. Mary's, which was a great place for me. Like I said, it was in the beginning of the women's movement. There was nothing I couldn't do in terms of leadership. I wasn't in any competition with any of the males because there were none there. So it didn't occur to me not to go for anything. And I ended up again participating in a lot of leadership. It doesn't occur to me not to go for something because I'm a female. And I attribute that to my training at the Mount and empowering women. Amazing things, so yeah. After I graduated, I worked at Hamilton High School for 3 years and loved every minute of it, teaching English. I created some classes, the history of the comic strip, something else to do with Shakespeare. I had a great time there because it was in the days when you could be really creative with what we were teaching. So anyway, my first son was born in February after I'd been there 3 years. We were living on the west side of town right before Kevin was born. And like right before Kevin was born, we moved back to Downey. So we had a little house, we did a little family thing. So Kevin's my oldest. And a couple of years later, I had Justin. We had Justin. So, and then we had our 3rd child, a little girl, her name is Megan. And we had Kevin and Justin and Megan. So, within a day or 2 of being born, Megan was at Children's Hospital. And she was born with a congenital heart defect. But they said she'd be fine, she'd be fine. She just had to get old enough to do the surgery and they'd fix her and she'd be fine. They said she'd be fine, she'd be fine. So during the first year of her life, she had these things called blue spells, which is when one of the things that goes wrong with her heart, there was a muscle mass that would sometimes clamp down and shut off the flow of blood to her, from her heart to her lungs. And so she would turn a little blue. So I just held her a lot. And she didn't sleep a lot. I nursed her the whole time, her whole little life. So she became like a 3rd arm for my body because I didn't want her to cry because then she'd have one of those spells. So I could cook dinner, tie kids' shoes, the boys with Megan right there. We were just attached. So anyway, when she was a little under 1 year, she had a blue spell and she went darker blue. And the doctor said, we need to take her in and investigate what's going on here. So she and I left in an ambulance from my little house in Downey to go to Children's Hospital. And I still have a very vivid picture of Kevin and Justin on the driveway waving goodbye to us. So Megan and I went to the hospital and we lived there. I lived in her room with her for 8 or 10 days. I was living there because I was nursing her. So they decided it would be more risky for her to have another one of those spells because it might begin to affect her neurologically. It would be fine for her to have the surgery. She would do perfectly well in the surgery. So I thought, okay, so here we go. Her dad was taking the bar exam that exact same time. So I put her on a gurney and walked her to the surgery, and she lived through the surgery, but something happened. They put in a pacemaker, and they corrected everything but her heart. They never figured out why her heart didn't pump again on its own. So the day went on and the night went on, and little by little things started to fail because the machine couldn't keep her heart pumping, and so she died a little after midnight on the day of her surgery. So, huge event in my life. Huge. I didn't understand it. The doctors didn't understand it. Nobody could understand it. The only verse from Scripture I can really quote is Romans 8:28. All things work for the good. That's the only one I know. All things work for the good. So I went through this difficult grief process thinking, okay, how can any good come out of this? No, God, this isn't right. I didn't get to buy her a bicycle or roller skates or a prom dress. I said, this isn't right. I didn't get to do it. She's my little girl. You can't do that. I went through the grief process like you couldn't believe. I'm very angry with God. Very angry, violently angry. I could have punched my fist through a wall after Megan died. I thought, why am I so violent? I didn't punch my fist through a wall and I didn't hit anybody, but I know I could have. And I realized it was because I was really angry with God. When you're angry with God, that's big anger. So I really had to come to grips with that. But it took me years. But I know that in my life, what I learned from Megan was the most profound lesson that I think I ever learned. She came into this world. She never spoke a word to me, but I know she loved me. She adored her brothers. She never spoke a word to them, and I know she loved them. And what she took from her life, and it was a full life, it was a little less than a year, but it was a life. And what she took was the love that any of us could share with her. That's what she took. The only thing that matters in the end is love. That's the only thing we can share because at the end, that's it. We all come in sharing, and in the end, that's all we take. We go back to that little scene that's so vivid in my mind of these two little boys on the driveway waving goodbye to their sister who they loved desperately, and that was the last time they saw her. So that's why I like Romans 8:28, all things work for the good. It took me years to get to the point where there was any good to get out of that. So I went back and got myself an assistant principalship at Torrance, and I was doing my doctoral studies, so I went into the PhD program at USC in policy planning administration. And I really wanted to be a high school principal, but at the time it was not really common for a female to be the principal of a large comprehensive high school, so I thought, that's okay, that's all right, I'll just have to beat everybody at their own game, I'll get myself a doctorate and then have to take it seriously. So I did. I went and got my PhD, and I was promoted from being assistant principal to principal. And it's funny because people would say, oh, what's she going to do when there's a fight that breaks out on the football field? And I'd say, I'm going to do the same thing you're going to do. I'm going to get out of the way. And I think I might be the only female who's ever been principal of Torrance High School, and it's now 100 years old. I think I'm the only one. Anyway, I loved being principal of Torrance High School. I was taking them through some reform movements. Everything was working out swimmingly. And I got a call from Al Kopis. He was here. He's still here as one of the chancellors. So he's a Carmelite priest, not a Jesuit. And he asked if I would be interested in having me come talk to them about their LMU's administration program. And I was like, sure, okay, I'll help you out. And I thought it was kind of like a consulting thing. I wasn't looking for a job, and he offers me a job. And he said, well, we'd really like to have you come and run our administration program. And I was like, okay, that's kind of interesting. One thing I've learned is I'll try anything once. So fortunately for me, my dad was still alive. So I used him as my mentor in this. So anyway, they offered me the position, but it was a $30,000 cut in pay. From a high school principal to coming over here and being in the school of running the admin program. So I went to my dad and I go, Dad. And he goes, well, let's talk about this. Anyway, my dad would always talk with a piece of paper and a pen, and we'd write things down. And I go, Dad, it's a $30,000 Who takes a $30,000 cut in pay? And he goes, well, let's really think about this. What would be the next steps for you? The kind of thing I watched him do when I was a little girl. I'd never even thought of higher ed. This was never really a concept for me. Didn't even go there. And Dad said, you have this ripple effect. When you're a classroom teacher, you have a ripple effect. When you're a school site administrator, you have a ripple. Well, from higher ed, if you want to talk about impact and ripple, there's things that you can do. There's probably a lot more things that you can do from that level. All I kept thinking was, it's a $30,000. Ridiculous. But my dad helped me see beyond that. So I came and I worked on their administration program, and when I walked in the door, this entire school of education was in the basement of the chapel. The entire school of ed. Father Kopis was the director. This was before we even had a dean, and I took Father Kopis and Father Batsis to a meeting in downtown LA with the guy who's the superintendent of schools in the Archdiocese, and we forged that relationship and began building Catholic school relationships, which are huge for us now. I'm not taking credit for where it is today, but I will take credit for the initial conversation. And you know, for the doctoral thing, it took me about 7 years of collaborating with people to really iron out that before we accepted our first class. So I directed the doctoral program, and I think now we're accepting our 10th class in educational leadership for social justice. Yeah, it's kind of cool. Yeah, it's very cool. I am comfortable that this is the legacy I'm able to contribute to this university. So here's the crazy part. Father Roger Bikwama, who came through the doctoral program, is now leading all of the Catholic schools in the country of Zambia. Now that's a ripple. When I think about that, I get chills. I got chills right now thinking that ripple that I would never have envisioned. And so many wonderful students who are now in leadership positions in districts and in schools. And I think, yeah, it's crazy. I've got chills right now. I'm blessed. I'm very blessed to know. After I ran the admin program, I went and directed the doctoral program and did that for several years. And then about 3 years ago, the current dean, Shane Martin, asked me if I would leave that position and take on this position, which is the associate dean for faculty, which didn't exist before, but he was getting more and more externally focused and needed the support for the faculty. So he asked me if I would do that, and at first I thought, oh gosh, maybe he doesn't like what I'm doing. But I don't think it was that at all. I think he really needed the help. So I left the doctoral program, and I've been in this position for 3 years. It's a position that was just created. I sometimes teach in the doctoral program, maybe a couple times a year. I still teach writing. I chair dissertations. I teach the organizational theory and change class, because what I really learned from the grief process is that when you ask people to change, what you're actually asking them to do is to go through a grief process, to move from
I can't believe this is really happening. Are you asking me to do this? To acceptance. It's the same. That's what they're doing. They're grieving. They're grieving the loss of something they know. So that's what I teach, and I'm able to teach it, I think, because I learned it with my daughter. I learned that from my daughter. The other day I went to a meeting and the chair of the department was having people go around and having people go over something, and I happened to be at the end of the chain of people. There were probably 13 or 15 people in the room in the educational leadership. And I watched this whole thing go on and I thought, oh my goodness, 18 years ago, I was it. I was the only person in leadership. And I said, this is a very humbling experience for me because 18 years ago, I would have been sitting in a room by myself. And here you all are. It just takes somebody having the thought, the vision, the idea. You know, for me, when I was trying to start the doctoral program, I tried every which way to Sunday to get people to take this seriously. And I said, you know, even the superintendent of the Catholic school system will never be a graduate of LMU if you don't give a doctorate. And that person will come from Santa Clara or USF or someplace else, but they'll never be able to say, I'm an LMU grad. And that got people's attention. So, you know, the vision never changed. It was just how to help people see that that's what they wanted to see. And sometimes it takes years, but well. So, my new thrill in life is I'm a Nana. Both of my kids have kids, so I'm really proud of Nana. I just love my kids, Kevin and Justin. They're amazing human beings, and I'm very blessed. I love spending time with 4 of the grandkids and having sleepovers and stuff. And I have 2 beautiful daughter-in-laws, Amy and Tanya. And now that I have 3 granddaughters, Grace, Marley, and Kate, having raised 2 sons and a daughter in heaven, now I have the privilege of having 3 granddaughters and 1 grandson, Eamon. I get Eamon having raised 2 boys. The girls are a bit of a mystery to me. So now this is the chance I get to see the girl part. I'm just amazingly grateful for the children. All 3 of them. The influence that Megan continues to have on our little lives. I'm forever grateful that for believing that as a woman, I can still do things. I do hit the glass ceiling once in a while, but that's okay. I know how to that's okay. Come around again, different version. So I guess the other thing that's been really nice for me here at the university is becoming aware of the spiritual exercises. I did the spiritual exercises for busy people. I did it with Father Randy. And that's been a real blessing to have that real gratitude and discernment. I'm currently working on staying really present in the moment-to-moment path that I walk with God. I'm praying that I daily, that I think so that I can be a vehicle, so that somebody else could see God through me. That would be cool. That's what I pray for every day. So I'm blessed. I'm blessed to be a mom, and a Nana, and a leader, and a teacher.
Sisters of St. Joseph of Orange, Dimensions of Koinonia.
The rhythm of life is a rhythm of change, of growth, of maturation. To be alive is to be part of this rhythm, which moves the world, the church, the individual.
Movement and rhythm is the ability to live and work in the present, while enriched and informed by the past and willing and striving for the future.
Entrance into this rhythm means risk. Risk that in moving from the past, one moves from the security of the known to the insecurity and incompletion of the unknown.
Dr. Holly Levitsky, Director of Jewish Studies at LMU and Associate Professor of English at LMU. Professor Holly Levitsky sits on a bench near the entrance to Auschwitz. She seems to be listening to voices we cannot hear. Gradually, voice becomes audible. It is Rudolf Hess, reading from the transcript of his statement given at the Nuremberg war crime trials in 1946.
I was appointed commandant at Auschwitz and chief inspector of the camps and worked to improve the efficiency of the extermination centers. I called me a true pioneer in this area. At Auschwitz, the gassing was carried out in the detention cells of Block 11. Protected by a gas mask, I watched the killing myself. In the crowded cells, death came instantaneously the moment Diplom B was thrown in. A short, almost muffled cry, and it was all over. I must admit to set my mind at rest. Now we had the gas, and we had established a procedure. What brings you to Auschwitz, mein Fräulein?
From, or doctor. I'm here with my students.
But Auschwitz is not a school, it was a work camp.
Oh, more precisely then, a death camp.
You are Jewish.
So, you are German.
It was a long time ago.
I'm thinking that poems from the other world say nothing about homeland. Mothers, fathers, brothers are silent about Auschwitz, are like trees petrified. I still write poems.
So you are also a poet?
I'm a teacher. That was Rosic's.
A poem.
Yes. He was a soldier in the Polish underground, and his brother was executed by the Gestapo in 1944, but he's still alive.
We all have our troubles, our stories.
Well, the stories are vital. There's a lot of pain there, and there's a lot of violence to tell the story, to hear it generation to generation. There's comfort in that, meaning.
It's tiring.
It's survival. I teach a writing class where I partner writing students with survivors, and the students help the survivors write their autobiographies. I believe we learn and teach through our faith and through an imperative to serve, both very deeply held Jewish and Catholic values.
Religion is tiring.
Well, values certainly exist exclusive of religion, but faith enlivens a value system. A spirit should know that.
Akademische. You love your work. Arbeit macht frei.
I love teaching. In fact, I teach these courses on the Holocaust regularly. I was introduced to Bill Elbrin, the president of the 1939 Club. Bill is a second-generation child of Holocaust survivors, a very successful lawyer in Century City, and he uses all the energy and resources he has to contribute to learning about the Holocaust. He helped fund a chair of Holocaust Studies at UCLA, which is the first chair in Holocaust Studies in the world. And I was envisioning what we could do at my university, LMU, and I brought Bill to a final session of my Holocaust class.
Holocaust class. How does one make a Holocaust?
Well, tragically, there are many answers to that question, though you're being facetious. Anyway, at the end of every class on the Holocaust, the students embark on a culminating creative project. I encourage them to take some skill they already have, some gifts, some talents, and find a text from class that we read that was very meaningful to them, and find some way to translate their response into this other medium. Some students were showing sculpture or collage they'd made or reading poems, and one student performed an exquisite contemporary dance. I invited Bill Elbrin. Now, Bill is not a man who cries easily, but by the end of it, he was wiping some moisture from his eyes, and he said, "Holly, I'm very impressed, but Why weren't survivors here to see this? Exactly what you're doing, what the students are doing is what survivors need. Survivors want to know that students are learning, that they understand what the history meant to the people who experienced it.
Survivor stories. Some did not survive it. I estimate at least 2.5 million victims were executed and another 500,000 succumbed to starvation and disease.
Millions more in other camps, but you know that. We will not forget it. When I met Bill, I didn't know any survivors. Bill said, Holly, you leave that to me. I will find a way. And together we created an annual Kristallnacht event. 2013 will be our 7th year. It's a commemoration of Kristallnacht, what historians know as the beginning of the Holocaust, which happened November 8th and 9th, 1938, and an educational program. We combined a memorial for the survivors and their families with an education side so that LMU students, faculty, and people in the community could come and learn about the Holocaust. I got to know many survivors. I went to their homes, and before long, they were my adoptive parents. And I was their adoptive daughter. And our students were their adoptive grandchildren. Every year, Kristallnacht has brought together between 250 and 300 people. Survivors in the community, their families, many students. Well, students come and they leave transformed by the experience. The first truly big event of the Evolving Jewish Studies program was to bring Elie Wiesel to LMU in 2007. He was treated like a rock star. We turned away over 1,000 people.
1,000 people?
There were 3,000 who saw him.
I know of this man. What do you hope to accomplish by bringing him to your students in Jewish studies? Why study the Jews?
You ask that question? Yes, I love the work. I can't imagine a better job. I literally can't. But the service is that kind of middle place between the personal and the professional. A teacher's life is very mission-driven. The service and reconciliation has really come about for me in the work of bringing students and survivors together. I also developed a study abroad program for Jewish studies. And every other year, we go to Poland so that the students could go on site and have an engaged learning experience, and that has been profound. It was about reconciliation. We organized a group of Polish students in Poland to work with my American students to learn about the Holocaust from each other's point of view. We meet for a long day in July in Poland, but almost throughout an entire year of convocations and interactions through email and other forms of new media. The Polish students talk with the American students, my American students. They get to know each other a little bit. And they're also reading the same collection of short stories written by Joe Lumer, a Polish child of survivors. All of his Polish stories take place in a little village called T. It could be any village. The stories take place from 1915 to 1939, which is when Poland was invaded by Germany. There are Jewish and non-Jewish characters, and each story focuses on some interaction between them. Most of the book borders on the violent, not always physically violent, but anti-Semitism and prejudice. One story is from the point of view of a young Jewish man who has just converted to Catholicism to please his Catholic girlfriend, but she tells him, "You fool, I loved you because you were a Jew." So we have these tricky interactions.
Yeah, no doubt, very tricky, as you say. Mutual understanding, cultural respect, a fool's paradise.
Anyway, so I have my American students read the story. The author, Lumer, donates dozens of copies of his book, and on our first trip, he met with us and read us one of the stories from his book. It was very moving. He passed away before we could meet with him the following year. Anyway, We have a beautiful kind of medieval style room in Town Square in Krakow. All the Polish and American students come in and meet face to face for the first time. I lecture on the history of Jews in Poland. I do that to discover what Polish students know, and it's shocking how little. And some of what they know is simply wrong. Most of them don't know there were 1 million Jews here in Poland before the war. They don't know that there were whole villages that were Jewish. The American students are equally stunned because it's their first real experience with the otherness of this population, this world, these other people, Poles, who look like them and are the same age as them and are university educated. But they find that their American education has provided much more on Holocaust history than Polish education has. I hope both groups of students realize that that same sort of lack of knowledge of one another is partly responsible for what was allowed to happen back then. Usually the realization occurs without us having to slam it in their faces. And I feel like that's what you have to do. We talk about the stories, about their culture and history, about the interactions between Jews and non-Jews in Poland. Student-to-student reconciliation. One seeing the other through the other's eyes. Luhmer, the author. I have stacks of books and boxes in my office right now in the middle of the floor, and they're his. His widow donated his entire library to me. Luhmer was born in a displaced persons camp, and he died last year at age 62. He and his wife Esther, who is my dear friend, were in Argentina vacationing. And they found his body in the canal. Like so many survivors and their children, he was being chased by phantoms and was simply out-chased.
Let me touch. I'm tired.
We will not sit here. You know, reconciliation is not the same as forgiveness. Forgiveness, in my tradition, is not about blanketly saying someone did something wrong or someone did something terrible and enough time has passed. Or that I have a big heart and everything's okay now. Reconciliation, for me, means really facing up to some very hard facts, confronting those facts or issues, and then moving beyond them. It starts in conversation and engagement with those with whom you want to be reconciled, but from there it needs to be a moving beyond together. I want to make sure I'm clear. I don't think reconciliation means resolution. I don't think it means forgiveness. I think for our hearts to be able to grow and not get smaller and more restrictive and let fewer people in, you have to learn to reconcile. Your heart has to get bigger and bigger. You can't keep bad things locked in. So for me, it's about facing and confronting painful issues, conversing with them and engaging with them, and then moving on to new and creative forms of connection. In this vale of tears, I still write poems, leaving in them my tongue. Together with my entrails, I say goodbye. Move away. Slowly, you close the door. You should go now.
Tried by Polish authorities in 1947 and sentenced to death, Commandant Rudolf Hess is hung on a one-person gallows erected at the entrance of Auschwitz. Outside the gas chambers he perfected.
Awakening by Gene Fallon, the CSJ Journal, 1998.
Breath stirring, in the unknown circuits of my being, winding its way to every cell.
Creator spirit, making you again, energy pulsating from every fiber of my being.
Body, mind, and spirit, attuned to your melody, caught up in your dance.
Echoing, echoing, resounding, resounding, resounding.
Through the universe.
Scott Wood,
At Seth Weiner,
Loyola Law School Center for Restorative Justice.
Talk about restorative justice a lot. I'm always talking about restorative justice. And I really get used to hearing, well, that sounds great. What is that again?
I struggled with this a lot at the beginning of our work because it's so amorphous in a way. What is restorative justice and what isn't restorative justice?
So I have my elevator speech. I say restorative justice is a philosophy that is an alternative to a punitive or retributive response to crime. And the practice that's come out of this is to facilitate a dialogue between the offender and the person who's been harmed, and have the offender take responsibility and be accountable to that person. The relationship has been damaged. So what are we going to do to make this right?
What I tell people in an elevator is justice used to mean balance in most places in the world. And somehow today, here, it has been distorted to mean punishment. So, restorative justice to me is restoring the definition of the word justice.
My add-on to that is that in the Hebrew tradition, in Torah, law is equated to right relationship. And it's that ancient idea that we're working on, right relationship.
Where I've come to with it is that it's really a worldview. Over the last 3 years, working with Scott in the center has been an opportunity to learn about it and see how it's done. In prisons, in schools, law schools, universities, in the community, in
And
courts.
the biggest thing that's happened in this city happened 2 weeks ago. The LAUSD school board adopted a policy to say two things. One, we're not suspending any more kids on the basis of willful defiance. And two, we're going to put restorative justice in our schools.
That wasn't even on the radar 2 years ago.
My God, this is the first major school board in the United States to formally adopt restorative justice in schools. People who care about this were just dancing in the street.
We're not taking credit for that, but it's a piece of this bigger wave. And people who understand this and live in LA notice that what we have going here is this little program at Loyola with, one volunteer just about full-time and one fellow and a little tiny budget and a lot of friends.
It's well put. A lot of friends. We've met a lot of friends.
I think in a way this goes back to Scott being a high school teacher at St. Ignatius Prep in San Francisco, and Greg Boyle, as a high school student, comes as a visiting student for some short amount of time, and they get to meet.
It must have been 1972. I was teaching English, and Greg was there visiting from Loyola High School in LA. He was just a kid, 17, and he had fallen under the influence of the Jesuits and social justice ideas, and so had I. I love being given a chance to say thank you to the Jesuits for teaching me about social justice, influencing me, and influencing Greg.
And the next time you met?
Years later, my son Tim was a senior at Loyola High School, and they have a social justice project between semesters. So Tim was going to go to Mission Dolores and live with Greg Boyle for a month. But when Tim said he wanted to do this, I said, I think this is kind of dangerous. We were living in Manhattan Beach and gangs in East LA. So I called Greg Boyle and I say, Greg, my son Tim wants to come live with you. Is it safe? I don't know what he said. But he must have laughed because it was the most dangerous time in LA. 1991 was the peak of gang violence, and the peak place was East LA. A mile around his parish, kids were shooting each other every night, and I'm like, is it safe?
Scott had civil law practice then.
So after I left teaching, I went to Southwestern Law School in Los Angeles.
And that's kind of an irony because Scott's father went to Loyola undergrad and then Loyola Law School. And Scott went to Loyola undergrad, but parties around too much. So when he applies to Loyola Law School, they don't let him in.
I wish I could say I went right into social justice work after law school, but I was married, we had 4 kids, so I went into our corporate practice as a civil trial lawyer.
Loyola Law School doesn't let him in, and of course he becomes their star professor.
The big shift came after 22 years. I had my own a small law firm with one partner, and my partner decided to leave law practice. I had a choice as to whether to continue by myself. Saw an ad in the paper for Loyola Law School looking for a professor to teach legal research, writing, and ethical lawyering. And of course, I always loved teaching.
He was one of the first professors to win the Excellence in Teaching.
But my wife, Jean, is the real story here. At the same time, she was asked to start a preschool in our parish at American Martyrs. So she went from being a stay-at-home mom, raising 4 kids, to running this preschool and getting paid. So that enabled me to leave law practice. And that pay cut is the best investment I ever made. In 1998, I started teaching at Loyola.
I was a high school student in Culver City in '97, and there was a peace conference in San Francisco. One of my best friends went to it. The Dalai Lama was there, and my friend got exposed to social justice as a concept. And he came back totally on fire about it. So we started the Youth Coalition of Culver City. And through that, we met a group of mentors started by a guy named Orland Bishop. He's basically a shaman from Guyana, South America, and has done a lot of work in the community, particularly in Watts, with violence prevention. And that became a significant relationship for me when I was a community studies major at UC Santa Cruz. I went to Watts to do a 6-month field study with the Violence Interruption Center, where Orland was the chairman of the board. And the executive director was Aquila Sherrills. Now, Aquila had grown up in Watts as a gang member. He was one of the first years to make it out to go to college, where he had a personal transformation and left to go back to work with Jim Brown, a football player, and Connie Rice, and others negotiating the peace treaty in 1992. In 2002, at the end of my internship, Aquila's son, Terrell, came home from college for Christmas and went to a party, and someone didn't like the color of his sweater and shot him, and he died. Aquila had to go to friends and family members and get them to put their weapons down. He said, "That's not going to be Terrell's legacy. We've been working on peace in this city for all these years. We're not going to give that up now." At the funeral, he stood up and said, "After the young man who did this serves his debt to society, we want to see him welcomed back into this community. We want to see the healing of the wounds that caused him to commit this murder. And we recognize that this is not a 15, 16-year-old who's responsible so much as a culture of violence." I didn't know it at the time, but this was my first real witnessing.
My starting point for all this was in 2006 or so, Jeannie and I got involved in a course of study over a year called Just Faith. It was a study of the principles of Catholic social teaching.
After college, I went to Sacramento and did a meditation program. And at night, I worked in a halfway house for adults with schizophrenia.
Learning Catholic social teaching, you realize that the fundamental idea is the dignity of the human person no matter what.
I went to AmeriCorps in 2005. We were stationed in Charlotte, South Carolina when Katrina hit. So we got sent to New Orleans. We were working for FEMA, which was awful. And we had these little FEMA badges, and we learned quickly, you had to hide the badge.
So my whole Jesuit education, from Loyola High, Loyola University, and then teaching in a Jesuit high school, social justice is just the air you breathe when you're around Jesuits.
Then we did Habitat for Humanity, forest fire prevention, invasive species removal from the Everglades, helping renovate a homeless shelter in Atlanta.
To be a person for others, that's a Jesuit ideal.
So now I come back from AmeriCorps with dreadlocks down my back, and I have a lot of plans. Then I see Orland. And he says, what do you want to do 15 years from now when you're 40? I'm struggling with this question. So the next day I go down to the beach, I cut off all my dreadlocks, and I put them in the ocean, and I say, I'm making myself available for what's next. But what's next? Help me.
In the spring of '09, I took a 40-hour training program called the Victim Offender Education Group with lifers in San Quentin. There are about 40 guys. And they have this very well-planned curriculum, including readings, a lot of journaling, writing about key moments in their lives that they would read in group. So it becomes a deep exploration of their lives about how they got to the point where they killed somebody. And then after months of meetings, they would bring in surrogate victims. When I was there, it was a young woman with 2 little kids whose husband was murdered, and a mother whose son had been shot in a drive-by. They come in and they meet the guys and tell their stories. And 1 or 2 of the guys tell their stories, so you'd have this dialogue. And it was profound. It was healing for everyone.
I thought the way to impact the big problems of the world would be to study international law, without realizing that meant law school when I said it. My dad's an entertainment lawyer, and all I ever heard from him was how intolerable law school was. So I said as a teenager, I'm never going to go to law school. If I ever try to find a law school, stop me. But he also said one of the things law school doesn't do is pigeonhole. So I get on the internet and discover that there were social justice law firms.
So at the end of that training at San Quentin, we got in a big circle, and we were kind of summing up a very emotional week of people coming in, telling their stories.
I found a place downtown, what was then Skid Row, called the Inner City Law Center, that advocates for the homeless and for inner city tenants. So I got a job as a non-lawyer advocate.
The group of about 20 of us really bonded. So now we're in a circle in the last minutes of this week together. And the question was, now what?
While I'm doing that, I applied to law school, and I'm dragging my feet. And I thought something else was going to come along, so I didn't really study very hard.
So they're going around the circle.
And then I get accepted to Loyola.
And when it comes to me in the circle, now what? I say I'm going to start a Center for Restorative Justice at LSU.
What happened for me in law school was I found out I wasn't a particularly good student, but I liked being involved in all the different clubs and activities and programs. I was trying to figure out what my niche was.
Well, I get back from San Quentin, and the first thing I go to Greg Boyle, and I say I want to do a victim offender group circle at Homeboy Industries. And Greg agrees. Then I invite Victor Gold, our dean, to come to lunch with me at Homegirls Cafe. And I say, Victor, I'd really like to start a Center for Restorative Justice at Loyola. I do it pro bono, and I don't need a budget. He says, sure, why not?
So I'm going into second year and I'm trying to choose my classes, and there's this class that prepares you for the moot court competition, which is a prestigious program. So I'm signing up for it, but I look and I see they're offering for the first time this class called the Restorative Justice Seminar. And the description was like, this is a course which talks about an approach to addressing crime that prioritizes the healing of both the victims and offenders in the community as a whole. And it totally stopped. Nobody had ever said healing in law school.
I started teaching with Bob Stephan. He was a Jesuit in training.
I said, I want to take this class, but the time conflicted with the moot court competitions. So I get into moot court, and the first week, everybody's sitting there, and the professor says, okay, you guys are all going to write papers and argue with each other. We're going to whittle you down to there's more and more losers, and there's only one of you standing. Second week, and I said, no. I'm going to the restorative justice class, and I did. And of course, I loved it.
I mean, can you imagine teaching guys like this?
There were less than 10 of us, people with really deep experiences, and we'd write papers every other week and share ideas with each other.
Here's the thing. Law school's pretty linear. And Seth would write these papers periodically. Seth was always a little broader than what we had assigned. Bob and I would talk about these papers. What about this guy, Weiner? It's hard to place him. That doesn't seem to be too linear. So we had to bring him down a notch.
I was always happy to be.
But it was great, because when we started the Center for Restorative Justice, Seth was elected student body president, so he had his hands on some money. And we had a budget. But you know, when you start programs and do talks and you buy a lunch for somebody, you need financing. We did a lot of work before your fellowship.
Yes, we had an event. Our first restorative justice panel.
The event where we had more speakers than attendees.
We had 4 people on the panel, and I think 5 people showed up in the audience.
When Seth graduated, Victor Gold, on his own initiative, created a fellowship in restorative justice. A 2-year fellowship and gave it to Seth. I gave Victor a lot of credit because once Seth got in there, he got this amazing guy giving his full time, which for this guy's like 50 or 60 hours a week.
In May 2011, we had the first Restorative Justice Another Way conference.
Seth just got going and we developed different programs.
January 2012, the Victim Offender Group Training in partnership with Homeboy Industries and the Insight Prison Project. February 2012, the second Another Way conference with panels on the death penalty, restoring victims, and restorative justice in youth. Over 300 attended.
He's like a dynamo. It's incredible energy.
March 2012, the first meeting of Restorative Justice Collaborative of Los Angeles.
Seth started that one. At the first meeting, there was this huge circle, and it must have been 80 people, and all of them knew Seth.
April 2012, the Restorative Justice Circle Training and the panel on Latino communities and the death penalty.
He relates to people, connects to people.
May 2012, the Victim Offender Advocacy Group at the California Institute for Women, the Respect Series on Restorative Justice in School Discipline, and the Beyond Turf Wars Conference with a panel on detention alternatives.
He's endlessly curious, does
2013, the Restorative Justice in Schools project began with LMU, LAUSD, and Westchester and Rich Magnet High School. June 2013, the third Another Way conference on healing in the wake of sexual abuse.
And now, right here, the Bellarmine Forum's Restorative Justice Conference will be the largest restorative justice conference ever held. So, we've become the kind of a center in a little way for restorative justice in Los Angeles.
But restorative justice it's a global phenomenon. From 2009, when I never heard the term, to now, it just seems like it's everywhere. And schools have been the newest incarnation of it.
That's where we're headed. If we can meet them in middle school, in high school, we can get them in a circle, get them talking and ways to resolve disputes, then we're going to prevent having a prison system with 160,000 people that are just being housed and cycling in and out of it.
It feels like the tide is turning.
The tide is turning. Last night I was downtown with a room full of DAs, and we got talking, and they think restorative justice makes a lot of sense. I mean, they're law and order. You know, it's what they do every day, trying to lock people up, but they understand that there is a more rational way to make the system matter, more human.
And now I'm going to have an opportunity in helping to create more of that.
Seth is leaving to move on to a new job.
There's a foundation that's been the primary funder for the center, and they approached me last December and asked me if I'd start working as a consultant with them to find funding strategies to support restorative justice in North America. And I've been doing that for about 4 to 5 months. So what's going to happen is that I'm going to start working for them full-time, and I'm getting married, and we'll likely move to New York to work for the foundation.
We've succeeded in expanding the Restorative Justice Center so that now it's going to be part of the Center for Urban Resilience. which is a major center at LMU's Westchester campus. It's gone from this little seed at the law school, now it's sprouted, it's becoming interdisciplinary.
One part of this is that for 4 years, Scott has been all volunteer for this, on top of being a full-time professor. So, in the next academic year, he'll get compensated for the first time for working for restorative justice.
It'll be a closing point for the center we started at the law school, but the birthing of this bigger project at LMU.
Restorative justice is a conversation that doesn't end.
So, back in the elevator.
It's not a formula. It's not something that you just have a blueprint and then you repeat it. You approach it from a point of reference and into relationship and intervene.
Martin Luther King said, power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice. And justice at its best is power correcting everything that stands against love.
So, out of the elevator and back to work.
Sisters of St. Joseph of Orange, directional statements.
We ask for the grace to stand with the poor, suffering, the oppressed,
To promote social justice.
To promote economic justice.
To be women of unity and reconciliation.
If we can just get them in a circle, get them talking.
facing them to some very hard facts, confronting painful issues, engaging with them. When you ask people to change, you're actually asking them to go through a grief process and then moving on to new and creative forms of connection.
It's a conversation that doesn't end.
And when I see like this huge number on my cell, I know it's them and it is great.
All those little things can have a big impression on the world.
To educate,
To heal.
To liberate.
So that all may be one. May what is mute in us be set free.
Well, it gives me great pleasure. I'm Sister Mary Ann, the Associate Director of the CSJ Center for Reconciliation and Justice. It gives us at the center, Judith, our Director, and Sister Linda Buck, another Associate Director, this wonderful opportunity to do this first Hidden Heroes Award from the Sisters of St. Joseph at the CSJ Center for Reconciliation and Justice. It's really a thrill and an honor. And today it's also my pleasure to introduce the artist who created this piece out of porcelain clay, this marvelous medallion. And here she is, Sister Sarah Jordan. And so I would like to just, before we give out these awards, talk about the artistic conception of this piece. Clay is of the earth like ourselves. So each medallion is hand-carved, sculpted from two types of porcelain clay. The lace reminds us of the beginnings of the Sisters of St. Joseph in 1650 France. Lace is also a sign of unity and interconnectedness. The water motif represents Christ, our living water. The CSJ cross, a symbol of commitment worn by our sisters, leaves an imprint on the clay. A single rose or bouquet is often given in recognition of or gratitude for achievement. Thus, this rose is given to our hidden hero. The Carcassonne Bridge in France represents the connection of Jean-Pierre Médaille, our founder, from a small village in France to his journey into a world in great need of reconciliation and justice. Our hidden heroes are bridge builders connecting life and work, prayer, action, joy and sorrow, reconciliation, and unity. A beautiful high-fire glaze, true celadon, gives the medallion a gemstone finish. This medallion has been created with clay and prayer for our hidden heroes by Sister Sarah Jordan. Thank you. Now I have the honor of calling each awardee up to receive the medallion. Daniela Danny Corona.
You sent me emails since the beginning of summer, and I was like, what is this one? And I was, here you are. Thank you for asking me out. And they probably understood you more than me because I have really bad thank you to all my friends in Asbury who are here. I kind of made them come, or how Sister Ann said, cordially forced them to come. But, and thank you to my family who's always supported me, and my boyfriend who's quietly sitting in the back, and everybody who's here. And you guys for not sleeping while I'm still here. So, thank
Mary McCullough.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much to the Sister Joseph for believing in me, and thank you to all of my colleagues and friends who are here, and particularly to my family. Don't I just have a It's so good, and I'm so honored and humbled and blessed in the words of E.E. Cummings. Thank you, God, for most this amazing day.
Elmo Johnson.
I have so many people to thank, and I've already been told to keep it short. And anyone who knows me knows that brevity is not my strong suit. So I went from 10 pages down to just a few thank yous. But I didn't want to miss anyone. First of all, I want to thank the Lord Jesus Christ, who continues to bless me, and this is a case in point. I want to thank my mother, who obviously without her, I wouldn't be here. And what's in me is basically a reflection of my mom. And I continue to hold her, God rest her soul, close to me every day. My family, my sisters here, Freddie, my my wife Louisa, and my beautiful and loving children, and my grandbaby is here today, Amaya. She's up there. I want to thank the Center for Justice and Reconciliation and the Sisters of St. Joseph of Orange. Thank you so much. I also want to thank the Department of Communication and Fine Arts, the entire nomination committee, the production company, wow, outstanding, and my body double. You nailed it. Thank you, Deshaun. Loyola Marymount University, of course. My family, my LMU family, my family of friends, thank you for your love and for coming here today to share this extra special day. And I definitely want to give a shout out to Pam Rector and the Center for Service and Action. Thank you so much. Pam is one of my heroes and biggest supporters. Getting to know her inspired me to continue to do my best in my little bits. My running family, I thank them. My Camino family, I thank you. I thank you all for being here today. And again, thank you for letting me be me.
Molly Levetsky.
I'm really going to keep it short, but I do want to thank Linda, my dear friend and playwright, who's produced a beautiful, creative expression of our discussion. Andrea, thank you for your amazing performance. Judith, thank you for the award of the center. Thank you so much for creating this. My friends and family for coming today, thank you. I really want to accept this on behalf of the survivors. More importantly, the people who didn't survive. And sorry, I knew I was going to cry. So I'm really going to keep it short. But for those who didn't survive the Holocaust, this is really for them. Thank you, Bill and Rosemary, also for coming, and Esther.
Scott Wood.
I really don't have the words to express how profoundly grateful I am and how humbled I feel to be among these heroes and to hear their stories. I want to thank first my wife Jeannie, who is here. My sister Rita and her great husband Jay. My beautiful daughter Allie is here with Kevin, her husband. My dear friend Ray came all the way down from Sacramento, a lifelong buddy and inspiration to me. And so many of you that I would like to thank. Frankie, I almost forgot you, Frankie. And of course, Seth Weiner, this great guy who's been such a major influence in my life and helping me to understand what the story of justice means. I want to also extend my deepest thanks to the great Sisters of St. Joseph of Orange, Sister Judith, Sister Mary Ann, Sister Linda, Sister Sarah. This is so beautiful, and thank you very much. I owe a special debt to religious women, as I think many of us in this room do. They were the ones that introduced me to the Baltimore Catechism when I was 6 years old. And so the religious women who not only taught me and taught many of us, but who lived social justice. So Gandhi says, be the change that you want to see. And the Sisters of St. Joseph of Orange, the other religious women have been the change, they've lived the change that we need in our world, and therefore they're a great source of inspiration to us. So I want to thank them and recognize them.
It's changed recently. Seth Leonard Wynn Weiner.
Thank you to my new wife, not Wayne Weiner, and to my mom, Madeline, my stepdad, Yukio, my sister, Mariko, who are here. My mom was my first teacher. And I want to acknowledge two people from the story of the Center for Restorative Justice, first which is Herb Blake, and the others was Jamie Carroll. And both Herb and Jamie have since crossed over, but have also been a continuing part of the work here. They're really both lifelong journeys towards restoring right relationships between themselves and others in their lives and between other people that they came across. And I want to say thank you to the actors. Quite an ethereal experience watching yourself. Feeling like a spinning image. I was going to twist my mustache out. Instead. So, thank you, Scott. You've been a father figure to me. I love you very much. I've since taken a job with the foundation in New York City and have moved over there. And it's not quite home yet. It's kind of like living in Disneyland. So I'm glad to be here. And just this past Thursday, moderated a panel as part of the Bellarmine Forum, which I think, at least for a while, will be my last official act with LMU, and so it's really touching to me to have this moment. So I accept this in memory of Jamie and Herb, and thank you to the sisters, and thank you to LMU.
To thank the people who have not yet been thanked, and that is the writers for today, the people who interviewed these people and did their writing. And they just all happen to be right against the wall, so I Jamie Brandley, who did the story. Paisley, who did Linda Bannister, who did Hollywood. Catherine Christoph, who did Mary's. And I think you've all guessed that Deshawn Terry did.
Thank you all for coming, and thank you to everybody who participated. appreciate today. This was such a rich event, and we hope that you'll continue to celebrate as we have a reception outside. So please join us.